Hello and welcome to this webinar. Is Solopreneurship the right path for me? In the early days, we called this as independent consulting the right path for me, but then we started attracting all kinds of other people like executive coaches and financial planners. So we're sort of changing and shifting our branding a little bit to Solopreneurship. I'm Liz Stebley. I'm one of the 3 independent consultants who started PICA. I think we've been live now about 5 years. It's a labor of love. I don't get paid. The only person who gets paid is Marissa, who's the wizard behind the curtain. But I've been in consulting since the last century, and I fell into independent consulting in 2004 when I got laid off from my corporate job. And I called a former consulting client because I'd started my career with PwC Consulting. So I called a former PwC client and I said, "Hey, I just got laid off. Do you need any help down there?" And he said, "Are you kidding? How soon can you get here?" So when I say that I fell into independent consulting, I literally had no plan. And I went and I had a meeting with that guy the next week, and I lined up my first project. I didn't even have a laptop. So after I finished that first project, it lasted about 9 months, I thought, wow, this was great. I didn't have to deal with all the big firm BS. I've made more money. I didn't have to work as many hours. I had more quality time with my kid. Everybody should be doing this. Of course, it's not quite that simple. In the next 45 minutes, I'm going to try to talk you out of taking this path, which is a little counterintuitive. You think I would try to talk you into it. But the reason I try to talk you out of it is because it's the hardest job you'll ever have. Because there's so many things that you don't know, and you have to be willing to try new things, learn new things, flex new muscles, and push your boundaries. So with that, I'm going to put in the chat a companion worksheet that you can download. Find that chat button. Well, you would think I'd never led a webinar before. Here it is. Okay. So there's a companion worksheet. The link is www.picanetwork.org/worksheet. I'm going to take you through about the top 10 things to consider about taking whether or not the path is the right one for you. And I encourage you to jot down your answers and talk it over with somebody you know and trust and are very close to, like your spouse or your significant other. Because even though it's called solopreneurship, nobody does it alone. You're definitely going to need the support of somebody close to you. All right, so with that, let's do some very quick housekeeping slides because I'm a recovering consultant myself. So this session is definitely being recorded, as you know. I will send the slides and a link to the recording for those of you who are not participating live. Probably by end of day Monday, because my assistant's already gone for the day. You're on mute, but you certainly don't have to be. I like it when it's more interactive and people ask questions. We had so anyway, interrupt me at any time. It's easier than me to double check the chat. And of course, there's the link to the worksheet. Okay, so the first thing I want to do before we dive into the things to consider is I want you to jot down a note, or you can put it in the chat. What is one of your biggest FUDs about being self-employed? FUD equals fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And really, it's kind of the mission of PICA. I mean, PICA is an educational organization and community. That's kind of our mission to vanquish FUD. Because especially when you're just starting out, there's more FUD than usual. You know, there's a little voice, or I always think of it as a little monster whispering in my ear, "You're not good enough. What makes you think you can do this? You've never been a consultant before." So I'm going to pause and let at least one of you put in the chat what your biggest FUD is, or speak out. Not having enough money. That's definitely one of the biggest ones. Another, it's pretty much not everyone's answer. Some other people answer, I don't know how to get clients. I don't know how to do sales, but it all comes back to, am I going to be able to make a living doing this? And so that actually is a very good lead in to my first thing to consider, and that is money management. There's 2 parts to this, hence both sides of the slide, but they're interrelated. So slow and erratic cash flow is the hardest part about being self-employed, especially if you plan to work with large companies. The larger the company, the longer it takes to pay. You think it's It'd be the other way around. I think startups would have a harder time paying. But I know people that have done consulting work for startups, and the founders literally whipped out a checkbook and said, okay, here, let me just pay your invoice now. On the other hand, I have another company, which is how I make my living. It's called the Proco Agency, and we represent consultants with Fortune 500 companies. I once had a Fortune 500 company in their contract say their payment terms were 120 days. That meant it was going to take about 5 months for the consultant to see any money from the work they did today. And that's ridiculous. It's insane. So the point is here is that when you're self-employed, whether you're in consulting, coaching, financial planning, whatever, it's very rare to have consistent, smooth cash flow. It tends to look like a Richter scale. When I was an independent consultant for, I think, about 15 years before I started Proco, my monthly income ranged from about $5,000 a month to $25,000 a month. I mean, that's a pretty dramatic range. As a single mom living in San Francisco, you can't make ends meet on $5,000 a month. So the important thing is must have a safety net. I'd say at least 3 months, ideally 6. Depending on the type of work you do and your type of where you live and the quality and extent of your personal network, etc., and frankly a little bit of luck, it will take anywhere from 3 months to 6 months, even longer, to build momentum, to get your name out there, to get your first client, and then of course, depending on those payment terms, you don't know how long it's going to be before you get in cash. So that's the very first thing to consider is must have a safety net. Now, a lot of people come to this workshop through Lehigh Harrison, an outplacement firm. That's how, because a lot of people are thinking, oh, I don't know if I want to go back to the corporate world. Maybe this is the right time to do this. And the good thing about being laid off is that you usually have severance. So just like when I got laid off from Levi Strauss and fell into independent consulting, for the first couple of months, I was double dipping. So what I did is I took all my consulting income and I stashed it away for my rainy day fund because I didn't know how long it would be before I lined up the next contract. So that's a tip for any of you who have been laid off. The other part of this equation, of course, are taxes. When you're self-employed, you have to pay your own quarterly taxes, which can be a real pain in the neck. The very first year you go independent, you do not have to pay quarterly taxes because the government does not yet know you're self-employed. But the next calendar year, you're on the hook. Now, the hardest part about paying quarterly taxes is having the money handy to do it, right? So my quarterly taxes ranged anywhere from $10,000 to $20,000 a month. So I'm not a quarter. God, not a month. I wish. I wish I had that kind of income that I was paying that kind of tax. So the first time after that very first project, right, it came time. I got, my accountant says, okay, we need to pay quarterly taxes. I got caught flat-footed. I had not saved enough. And I had to scramble to come up with the money because you certainly didn't want to pay penalty and interest. And I thought, I am never going to be in this situation again. So what I did after that is I took originally 50%, half of every invoice that was paid, and then I cut it back to 40%, and I put it into a separate bank. Not my normal bank where I would log in and see that I had $10,000 in savings. Because if I log in and I see I have $10,000 in savings, I say to my daughter, hey, we can have enough money to go on vacation. Because I have no fiscal discipline whatsoever. But so I had to hide it in another bank. And then when it's time to pay quarterly taxes, I would transfer the money that I needed. Then here's where the magic happens. When it came time to do my annual tax return, and I did my self-employed tax deductions and contributed to myself. I said that backwards. When I took my self-employed deductions, I had plenty of money left over in that secret bank account to put into my self-employed retirement plan, either a SEP IRA or solo 401k. I usually had anywhere from $20,000 to $25,000 left over. That's the instant way to lower your taxable income. So if I had made $100,000, now I'm claiming that I made $80,000 because I put $20,000 into my retirement. This is how you get your effective tax rate into single digits. Business owner tax deductions and paying your own retirement account. It's awesome. I did so well with that trick that I no longer put money into my retirement account, which is really nice. So the point here is you have to be organized enough to manage your taxes, or trick yourself the way I used to. But don't be caught short, and don't skip them, because penalties and interest are a nightmare. Okay, another thing to think about for sure is dealing with uncertainty. A lot of people really just can't stand the sense of not knowing where the next paycheck is going to come from. So, for example, my first few years that I was an independent consultant, I would get together every once in a while with a friend of mine, Benita, who had just gone back to work for one of the big firms, Accenture. And we'd get together and I'd say, Benita, you should just go independent. I mean, you don't have to deal with the firm. You won't be traveling all the time. You'll make more money. I said, it's really awesome. You don't have to deal with all that big firm BS. And finally, she said, Liz, I know that you're doing really well and you really love working that way. But she says, and I have thought about it over and over again, but I know it will drive me bananas if I don't know how I'm going to pay the mortgage. She said, I will not be able to live with that stress. So you need to reflect, even though you have that, right, that safety net of income, maybe even 6 months or more, can you still deal with not knowing where your next project is going to come from and where the money is going to come from? That's by far the most stressful thing about being self-employed. So like my friend Benita, not everybody has the stomach for it. So this is where having a conversation with your partner really makes sense. But another thing about dealing with uncertainty, not necessarily from knowing where your next work is going to come from or your income, is when you're self-employed, stuff happens. Surprises happen. You need to be able to go with the flow. For example, last summer, I came downstairs to lead this workshop, which I lead from my home office, this webinar, and the internet was down. Oh, great. So, I go to the end of the house, I reboot the router, whatever. Still no internet. And by now it's like 20, 30 minutes before the webinar or whatever. And I'm thinking, there is no way that I can go to Best Buy, get a new router, do all that. So now what do I do? So I looked at my phone, said nearest free Wi-Fi, went to the nearest coffee shop, sat outside on the patio, and led this workshop from outside of the patio. So my point is, when you're self-employed, you need to be able to adapt on the fly and still make your commitments. So that's another thing to consider. If you like a stable environment, then this is not the right path for you. Also, if you are one of those people who are easily frustrated by tech problems, this might not be the right path for you either, because you're your own tech support. That's my least favorite things about being self-employed. Okay, third item, prior consulting experience. This is not a requirement, but I have coached hundreds, if not thousands at this point, of people into self-employment or consulting. And what I've witnessed is the people who have some sort of prior experience in a consultative role tend to have an easier time building momentum when they're self-employed. This doesn't mean that you need to have worked for PwC or a large firm like I did. Maybe it was an internal role, like you were an internal HR consultant or development consultant, or you were a project manager. I'm thinking of a PICA member who was with HP, Hewlett Packard, for over 20 years as a project and program manager. So she worked on literally dozens of projects, but that was more of like a consultative role. So these are things to consider. If you have any work experience along those lines, where here's really what it's about, is the ability to scope the work and manage that scope, right? So when you're being hired as a solopreneur, you're being hired to do A, B, and C. And it's very clear. It's in your contract or your letter of agreement. Then they come back to you and they say, oh, Rebecca, you're so great. We'd also like you to do D for us. Well, our instinct is to try to serve a client, to be of service to the client, which is great, but it's not in your contract. So you have to have the presence of mind to say, oh, Sue, yes, I'd love to help you with this, but we only contracted for A, B, and C, and this is not a trivial amount of work, this item D. So let's set up a conversation and really understand what that's going to entail. And then I'll see if we can work it into our current agreement as an addendum, or if it's going to be a whole separate ball of work. So you need to be comfortable saying no and managing scope. So not everybody is comfortable doing that, or has the presence of mind. They just say yeah, and then they're overworked and underpaid. That's not the goal of being self-employed. All right, another thing to consider is your mental outlook. So I mentioned it before that a lot of people come to this webinar because they found out about it through outplacement companies like Lehigh Harrison. So they have a different frame of mind, right? When you get laid off, you might think, oh, I kind of defeated. Like, why was I selected for the layoff? And you might not feel like your strongest and best self, or you might think like a weight has been lifted. Like I I did that for so long. Maybe now really is the time to try something new. Maybe now I'm at that point in my life where it's time to try something new. But you have to have the confidence to be able to figure out what you don't know. The other thing about confidence is that, especially when you have to quote a billing rate or a price for your services, confidence is everything. All caps, underlined, exclamation points. My other business represents about 75 consultants across the country. Most of their billing rates range anywhere from, I don't know, $250 to $400 an hour. We have one consultant who charges $800 an hour. And she has her experience is no stronger, and her background, her education, no stronger than any of the others. But she's got the confidence, and she asks for $800 an hour, and she gets it. So pricing, confidence is everything when it comes to pricing. The point about this whole slide is now might be the best time to strike out on your own, or it might be the worst time. I'm also always, when I'm talking about this slide, I think about my brother Jeff, who was laid off. He was like in his, I don't know, he must have been like mid to late 50s, and he got laid off. And he's like, I don't know, sis. I said, well, why don't you think about consulting to your industry? Because you've been in it for 30 some odd years. He's like, I don't know, sis. And he's like, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to find another full-time job. Who's going to hire a middle-aged white guy? And particularly with gray hair. And I said, well, nobody if you have that attitude. So it's all mental outlook. You need to take good stock in where you are at the moment. All right, now we talked earlier about FUD, about fear, uncertainty, and doubt. This is by far the biggest one. Business development is probably the biggest worry that consultants have, particularly for those who are just getting started. But this FUD, business development, get new projects, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, always resurfaces. So I've been self-employed now 19 years, and every December, I still have the FUD monster in my ear saying, you're not going to have, because contracts end at 12/31, a lot of them. So my FUD monster is always in my head saying, business is going to fall off a cliff. We're not going to make it. We're not going to have enough money. We're not going to make payroll. Every year, it's been 19 years. You would think I would finally know that it doesn't going to happen, that it's not true, but it never goes away. But one way to get over this psychological hurdle is to avoid calling it sales. If you read any definition of business development, it does not include the word sales. It's developing of relationships to build trust and awareness and an understanding of what your skills are, what their problems are. I don't know anybody that has ever hired a consultant or a solopreneur for that matter without first having a conversation. And you don't have to be salesy. It's literally, are you good at uncovering what their pain points are, and can you articulate how you may be able to solve those problems? So as consultants, we're problem solvers, not salespeople. So these are the things to consider along that line. Your ability to network and reach out to people can make or break your success when you're self-employed. So it's not sales, it's not cold calling, it's not, spamming or email blasts. It's about building a ton of relationships, number one. And number two is being known for something, being memorable. And so it's part A is branding, defining your niche. PICA has a whole workshop on that, which is very tough to lead, frankly. Um, but if you go to market as a jack of all trades, it dilutes your branding and people don't know what to refer you for. But if you have a particular niche, let's say uh, customer customer experience in the healthcare industry, then you can become the master and the expert in that particular niche. Makes it easier for you to remember and easier to be introduced and referred to other people. So in terms of the things to reflect on and think about, all of these questions are the reflection points. But I don't want people who are more introverted and quiet to think that, wow, I can't go out there and talk to all of these people. It's about being human and reconnecting with people that you may have worked with even 5 years ago. But if you're not comfortable reaching out to somebody that you've worked with 3, 4, 5 years ago and saying, "Hey, Joe, I know it's been a while. I'm considering something new uh, in my career, and I'd really value your opinion. I know we haven't talked in ages, but would you be up for a virtual cup of coffee?" If you're not comfortable doing something like that, this is probably not the right path for you. Have to be honest with yourself. If it's fairly easy for you to keep in touch with people, you'll have an easier time finding new one. Okay, number 6, supply and demand. My corny pun here is don't just roll the dice and hope for the best, but try to get a feel for what the market's like. This can be a little bit tricky because we're all in different parts of the country, different areas of expertise. But let me give you 2 different examples that maybe help bring this into sharper contrast. Let's say that you're really, really good at planning and facilitating offsites or senior leader meetings, right? Most companies can't afford to have that kind of skill set on staff full time. So there tends to be a fair amount of demand for people who can do that kind of work very well. On the other hand, let's say that you really want to be an executive coach, or you are an executive coach, and you're looking to do it on your own outside of a larger company. The problem with coaching is there's literally thousands of coaches in any given metropolitan area. So there's a glut of supply. Maybe there might be demand, but there's so many tens of thousands, 1,000 of coaches or more. How are you going to stand out from the crowd? So that's what I mean by sort of gauging supply and demand. So how can you gauge this? First, talk to people who either do what you do or that you want to do, or are in a position to hire people like you. And say, ask them, well, how did you get into this? How do you find the flow of work? Would you be, is this type of skill set something that you would look to hire an external person for? If it's somebody that's currently in a position to hire somebody like you. You're in a unique time right now on the cusp of being self-employed, because you can, with all candor, reach out to people and say, "Hey, I really value your opinion. I'm thinking of stepping out on my own to do ABC. What do you think?" You could do it via virtual coffees, like I mentioned before. You could send an email to 5 people, 10 people, and just say, and ask them various questions. Would you hire somebody? Do you think I would be a good fit for this? Do you think there's demand for this? Would you or somebody hire an external person to do this type of work? It's a little bit like licking your finger and sticking it in the air to see which way the wind is blowing, but it's better than nothing. But try to gauge if there's a market. I mean, you might be super excited about and the best person on the planet at underwater basket weaving, but there's literally no demand. So don't leap unless you know that there's fish in the pond where you're going to be fishing. Weird metaphor, but I think you understand. Okay. Structure versus self-starter. I just put this one in this slide. I switched this one in about, I don't know, about last year, I guess. So I have seen super smart, accomplished people go back to a full-time job just after 6 or 9 months because they lack the focus or the discipline to properly set up and launch their business. So let me tell you another little example or story. About 3 times a year, I run an 8-week boot camp. It's called the Solo Consulting Boot Camp. I run this through PICA. And early last year, so going back to 2022, I had this gentleman in my boot camp, and he was had been laid off from his job. He was a vice president of something or other, super smart, had checked all the boxes, except that he suffered from what I call shiny object syndrome. He when I do the homework, when I do the boot camp, there's homework every 2 weeks, and we come together as a cohort. We're like, okay, how'd you do? Let's review. Let's discuss. Let's improve. Right? He was never come to class with his homework done. He said, "Oh yeah, I started to write the outline for my website, but then I realized I needed to fine tune my other website related to real estate. So I ended up doing that instead." So he had shiny object syndrome. But the other thing is he really needed and missed, frankly, the structure of a corporate job. He liked being able to meet with his team once a week, and he sort of needed the structure of like a quarterly business review to keep those goals right in front of him all the time. My point is that if he had known these things about himself prior to doing the boot camp, he would have saved himself $2,000 for the boot camp and 6 or 8, 9 months of grief trying to make something happen that really wasn't in his DNA. So don't be like him. Think it through first. All right, this one is a big one, not as big as it used to be, thanks to the Affordable Care Act, but still big enough to definitely consider. I mean, obviously, if you have a spouse or a domestic partner with company-sponsored health insurance, it's less of a consideration than if you have to pay for your own insurance. But if you do have to pay for your own insurance, will you be able to afford it? Which obviously you have to have your pricing such that you can afford your own health insurance. PICA has a workshop on billing rates and pricing strategies too. Can you do a higher deductible plan? And lower the insurance premium. Are you eligible for COBRA through your prior employer, current employer? If you can go COBRA, 90% of the time it's cheaper than buying your own plan. Once you do need to buy your own insurance, let's say, I strongly encourage you find a health insurance broker because they have saved my butt a couple of times. The first time I was looking for my own insurance, so when I got laid off, I went through COBRA. That was ended. So then I got hooked up with a health insurance broker in California, and I said, I need a family plan. And he says, well, how many people are in your family? And I said, well, it's me and my daughter. And he says, no, you don't need a family plan. You need 2 separate plans because family plans are designed for 4 people. You're only 2. Plus your daughter, who's 5 years old, her premium is going to be really low. Is she healthy? Yeah, she's super healthy. It's like, yeah, for sure. Get 2 plans, high deductibles. Save me a ton of money. Then I moved to Nevada 3 or 4 years ago. So I needed new insurance because California insurance wouldn't work over here. So I called the broker. I said, I need an HSA compatible plan because that's another way to funnel more money and save more money and lower your effective tax rate. So we did it. So then a year goes by, open enrollment, whatever. I get this big fat letter from the insurance company that I don't have time to read, so I didn't read it. I just let it renew. In early January, I got an email and a phone call from my insurance broker saying, did you renew your plan? I'm like, well, yeah. She's like, they converted it. It's no longer HSA compatible. I know that's really important to you. We have 3 weeks so we can still switch your plan and get that taken care of. And I said, oh, thank goodness you were looking out for me. So that's my two stories about health insurance brokers. You don't pay them, the insurance companies pay them. So it's a free service to you. To give you an idea of how much those insurance costs, it depends on your state, of course, but I'm a very healthy woman in my late 50s, and I'm paying $864 a month with a $6,000 deductible. So it's practically self-insurance and basically insuring against catastrophic illness or accident. The other thing about benefits that nobody tells you is that, related to benefits when you're self-employed, is that vacations are twice as expensive because A, you're paying the $6,000 to go to Hawaii for a week or wherever you're going. And B, it's the opportunity cost of not working, right? Most solopreneurs either bill by the hour or even by the project, whatever. But for most self-employed people, time is literally money. So if you're not providing a service to a client, you're not getting paid. So there's the opportunity cost of not working. Frankly, that was never a big factor for me because I worked hard so that I can go on fabulous vacations, but it's still something to consider. Kind of a little bit related to that, and somebody's asked me, this has come up a couple times in my office hours. Once a week, I hold office hours for PICA members, and they pop in and ask me questions. And somebody said, how do you turn it off? How do you actually take vacation? How do you actually take time off? That's actually the harder part about being self-employed is not being on your phone or your laptop all the time. There are definitely tricks to managing that, but I won't get into here. Okay, this is one of my very favorite Dilbert cartoons of all time because it reminds me of when I worked for the global firm. They're all like this, not just PwC. But my point is that when you're self-employed, the strongest thing you have on your side is your reputation. So you need to be the type of person who both thinks before they speak and does whatever it takes to deliver. So it's two sides of the same coin. If you say, oh, I'll get you that report out by the end of day tomorrow, you got to do whatever it takes to get that done by end of day tomorrow. Or let me change that a little bit. Let me say I'm going to get you these notes by end of day today. I mean, it's a little bit before 2:00 my time. I got plenty of time to put together the email, send you guys these slides. Yeah, but then what if my partner breaks his leg out there when he's working in the yard or something, and I got to take him to the emergency room? I mean, life happens. And the next thing you know, I'm back at my computer 11:00 at night trying to get the slides out to you by midnight. That's where the other side of the coin comes in. Under promise and over deliver. Think before you speak, even though you're 90% sure that you'll be able to get the slides out by end of day today. Still promise end of day Monday. Give yourself a little cushion. Also, the good thing about being self-employed, of course, is that you have more control of your time. Like I don't ski or play golf on weekends anymore, right? Because I go on the weekdays, but I frequently work on Saturday mornings. You can work any 40 hours you want or 60 hours you want. Doesn't necessarily need to be 9 to 5. If you don't like the idea that, wow, I might have to work a little bit on the weekend, this is probably not the right path for you. Well, my last thing to consider is job fulfillment. This is the fuzziest, which is why I put it last. But it's worth thinking about your intrinsic motivation and what inspires you. Like where do you get your rewards? Not just financially, but what keeps you going? And these are some of the things that I've heard from people who have gone back to corporate jobs. Some people really miss being part of a team or mentoring others, because even when you're self-employed, I mean, we have a strong PICA community, but it's not the same thing as I don't know, drinks after work or chatting over coffee in the morning, or the weekly check-ins with your team, or seeing how people grow, or the long-term effects of whatever it is you're working on. When you're hired as an outsider, whether it's a coach, consultant, financial planner, whatever, it's a discrete It's a discrete scope of work. Now, I encourage everybody to check in with your clients 3, 6, 9 months later. Keep that relationship warm, but it's just not the same thing as being part of a team or seeing your efforts play out over time. So if any of these questions resonate with you, a traditional job is likely going to be more fulfilling. Might not be more financially rewarding, but it's not all about just the money. Okay, I'm going to take a sip of tea before I go into the next section here. So let me know if you have any questions about anything that I just covered or anything else to consider. I see at least one person shaking their head, but I'm still going to take a sip of tea anyway. All right. So if I haven't talked you out of it, and you're thinking, yeah, handle all those 10 things, is there a way that I can try it though without fully committing, like setting up an LLC, building a website, blah, blah, blah? And the answer is yes, there is. So the very easiest way to test the water is to subcontract through an agency. I have 2 slides following this. One talks about agencies and one talks about platforms. They both kind of do the same thing where they match talent with projects. This is by far the easiest way to test the water because you really don't have to do anything except focus on your skills and expertise and doing the work, right? You don't need to find the work. You don't need to figure out the price of the work. You might have to help scope the work, but you don't have to carry the insurance. You don't have to have a legal entity, whatever. That the agency or the platform handles most of that stuff for you. The biggest con, of course, is you will get paid a fraction of what you would if you found work on your own, which is why this is a short-term solution, not a long-term solution. This is one of the things that 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 PICA is about, is teaching you how to find your own work, so you don't have to give up 35% to an agency. Now, it depends on the type of work you do, of course. So let's say that you do the going back to my earlier example, facilitation of senior leaders, planning the agenda, facilitating, whatever. Those tend to be pretty short stints or engagements. You can probably handle more than one client at a time, assuming that the events don't happen at the same time. So when your work is in shorter duration and smaller dollar increments, it doesn't feel like you're giving up as much money to an agency. But conversely, the type of work I did when I was a solo consultant was full-time work, often 40 hours a week, sometimes peaking at 60 hours a week. Most projects were usually 9 months long, often longer. I did the math. Well, after that first project ended, I thought, oh smokes, I don't have anything else lined up. Plus, I got a kid to feed. I got to line up some work. So I went and talked to some agencies in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I found out that the business model was, they would take 35% of whatever the client paid. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, I have no fiscal discipline. I already confess, and I certainly can't do any math in my head. I went home and I opened an Excel spreadsheet. I'm like, okay, so my last project lasted 9 months. It was full-time work. That was X number of hours. And I made X dollars. So if I gave up 35% of that, holy smokes, they're going to make $45,000 by helping me find work. I'm not willing to give up $45,000. And I never did. I doubled down. I thought, I'm going to find my own work. But when you're just starting out, yeah, got to see if you even like this kind of rhythm and flow of work. So it might be worth it. Now, I have trademarked the phrase that friends don't let friends W-2. That means ideally to make the most money and to make the math work for you, you're going to want to be paid on a 1099 business to business basis. PICA teaches you how to do that. Another big con now of going through an agency or platform is that you'll likely be paid on the W-2 basis like a temp worker. But again, if it's just while you're working on all the other things, while you're working on your branding and building your website and optimizing your LinkedIn profile, and figuring out your pricing strategy and lining up your business insurance, and believe me, the list is long of stuff you need to do. Maybe you could find work through one of these other sources. Here's some national agencies to consider that I've heard good things about and that I know people who have worked through these agencies. The difference between an agency and a platform is the amount of human involvement. so that you're likely to talk to a human if you sign up with an agency and there's work for you versus a platform, which is all AI and keyword driven. Business Talent Group, BTG, has a very good reputation. The work tends to be more strategic. They tend to pay pretty well. I do know a handful of consultants who have had really good success with them. RGP tends to be not paid quite as well, but has a lot more sort of longer term work because it tends to be more tactical and supplements their internal consultants. So that's kind of a different model. They have a bench of full-time consultants, and then they have a whole army of people that subcontract to support the lead consultants, which is something to consider actually if you have never had any prior consulting experience. It'd be good to be a part of a larger team so you can learn that sort of rhythm of consulting. Not conversely, but in addition to the agencies are some online platforms. When I send out these slides, all of these logos are hyperlinked, so you can easily click through to their websites. It's, like I said, similar to the agencies, but their markup is only 20%. The downside is they have tens of thousands of people in their database. So Catalan, last I heard, had over 100,000 resumes in their database. So that's a lot of fish. How are you going to stand out? One of my recommendations is to upload a long version of your resume. Now, if you're going to apply for a traditional job, I think that at least when I used to do this, the conventional rule was your resume should be 2 pages long, front and back. When you're doing uploading a resume to a platform like this, you want to upload a resume that's 4 or 5 pages long, and you want to list every single project that you've ever worked on as a separate line item, separate bullet point. So earlier I mentioned this woman, Sharon, who used to work at HP over 20 years, right? She had her regular traditional resume was not very long. She had 20 years at Hewlett Packard. Okay. But her long version of her resume, it listed program manager, program manager, program manager, program manager, program manager. So guess how many times the keywords program manager appeared in her resume? That's sort of how you play this algorithm game with the platforms. They track how often you log in, etc. So set a calendar reminder. So every Monday, 9 o'clock, check in, poke around, see if anything is in your wheelhouse. People get intimidated by submitting a proposal. Basically, it's a couple paragraphs, explains why you're interested in the work and why you feel you're a good fit for the work. Do that in a Word document first, and then paste it in to check grammar mistakes and everything. But the second time, you can just copy, paste, and tweak. Saves a ton of time. I do want to mention that I just updated the slide this morning, actually. LinkedIn Profinder no longer exists. It's now called LinkedIn Services Marketplace. It's free. I mean, it's free to sign up with any of these agencies or platforms, but it's 100% free because basically the people who are looking to hire a solopreneur, consultant, or freelancer can search all the resumes and profiles, right, in LinkedIn, and they can reach out to you directly. So the scoping, pricing, contracting, all of that is handled on your own. So even as a long-term solution, LinkedIn Services Marketplace, which is a lot harder to say than Profinder, might be a good way to supplement your income. All right, last, but I really, really want to do this. I don't want to just test the waters. I'm 100% sure this is what I want to do next. How to get started? The whole point of this webinar, really why I continue to do these webinars, is to tell people about PICA and what PICA has to offer. But number one, of course, review and discuss the trade-offs, right? 100%. In fact, we should make that a requirement on the PICA sign-up page. Have you discussed this with somebody close to you? That's how serious it is. If I was in your shoes, the next thing I would do is to try a PICA workshop. Getting started as an independent consultant. I think it's actually called Getting Started as a Solopreneur now. It's coming up November 9, which sounds like a long way away, but really it's like 10 days, no, 2 weeks away. And in that class, we'll take you through the top 5 things you need to do to launch a business. Setting up an LLC is not the first thing. So there might be some surprises in there. But after that workshop, you actually get a checklist that you can print out. It's got hyperlinks too, where you can, it's like, oh, this is how I get my federal ID. This is how I get my insurance, blah, blah, blah. But if you pay for a workshop and then that you join PICA afterwards, we'll credit you um, the cost of the workshop. It's the safest way to try before you buy, or what I call the wine tasting model. You can pay for the wine tasting, but if you buy the bottle, you don't have to pay for the wine tasting. Or you can just join PICA. Seriously, $395, which is tax deductible, is like so cheap. I know we should raise the rates, but I don't want to price people out of it. So that's why we keep it at $395. In renewals, the price is going to go up probably to about $149 for 12 months. And so it gets you access to all the tools and templates in our online library. All of our workshops are included in that. I hold office hours once a week. We have an online community, private community on LinkedIn where people post and help each other out. And what's the other part? I'm missing. There's something else. There's some other advantages to PICA, but whatever. Anyway, so that's how you, if you're really ready to get started, that's the way to do it. Oh, one thing that's not on the slide that sometimes is the PICA Bootcamp. It's not on the slide because we haven't yet set it up, but it will launch, I believe. I'm looking at the calendar. Oh, that's last year's calendar. It's going to start the first Friday in January. It's 90 minutes. Every other Friday, those the cohort sessions, limited to 8 people. I lead all the cohorts, and we take you through everything, soup to nuts, over 8 weeks. It includes all 6 of PICA's workshops, and then the homework, and the check-ins, and it's sort of like an accelerator. So if you're 100% sure that this is what you want to do, send us a note and say, yeah, I'm very interested in the bootcamp. I think Marissa will have this set up and on the calendar probably by end of next week. But the hashtag, if you want, just not hashtag, but the link, if you just want some general information, maybe even a sample syllabus, it's picanetwork.org/bootcamp. And by virtue of signing up for this webinar, you're already on our mailing list. So when it is on the calendar, you will get the email that says, hey, our next bootcamp is scheduled. And that's it for today. I'm going to stop the recording so we can have candid conversation, answer any questions that you might have about anything related to being self-employed. And I hope to see you again soon.